Eleanor Mitchell lived in a modest apartment on Detroit's east side, where factory noise blended with the night wind through thin walls. Each morning at 5 all sharp, she would brew black coffee in a chipped mug and sit by the window overlooking the industrial district. Her neighbors knew her as the quiet woman who worked at the public library, shelving books and helping children with their homework. She chose simple white shirts from discount stores, wore the same pair of worn sneakers every day, and kept her brown hair tied back in a practical ponytail. Mrs. Henderson from next door often remarked that Eleanor seemed like such a nice woman, but there was something deeply sad about her, something broken that she carried like an invisible weight. What Mrs. Henderson didn't know was that Eleanor had recently applied for a position at Sterling Aerospace, the largest aviation corporation in Michigan. Not as chief engineer or senior designer, but just a basic technician role, entry level, the kind fresh graduates usually filled. When asked about her qualifications during the initial interview, she had been deliberately vague. Education, I learned through hands-on experience. Previous employment, various garages around Detroit, fixing cars mostly. Mark Davidson, the hiring manager, had looked at her with barely concealed skepticism, wondering why a woman her age would apply for such a junior position. You don't have any formal training? No certifications? Eleanor had met his gaze steadily. Sometimes passion matters more than papers, but the practical test told a different story entirely. The way she diagnosed engine problems by sound alone, how her slender fingers moved across mechanical components with an intimacy that spoke of years of expertise. She had completed the assessment in half the allocated time, identifying issues that even their senior technicians had missed. Word spread quickly through Sterling's headquarters about the mysterious woman with no credentials but extraordinary skill. The whispers reached Richard Sterling himself, and his reaction was immediate and visceral. "Impossible," he had snarled during the Monday morning board meeting. "No untrained woman can outperform my MIT engineers." His pride couldn't accept it, wouldn't accept it. And so this special interview had been arranged, not to evaluate Eleanor's abilities, but to humiliate her publicly, to prove, once and for all, that technical excellence belonged exclusively to those with prestigious degrees and the right chromosomes. Eleanor knew this, had known it the moment she received the invitation. Yet she came anyway, carrying secrets that would shatter every assumption in that room. The sleek conference hall of Sterling Aerospace hummed with anticipation. 200 of Detroit's finest engineers, executives, and invited press members filled the auditorium, their eyes fixed on the spectacle unfolding on stage. At the center stood Eleanor Mitchell, dressed in her simple white button-down shirt and faded jeans, looking utterly out of place among the suits and lab coats. Beside her loomed the R7000 aircraft engine, a $2 million marvel of engineering that had stumped Sterling's MIT-educated team for 3 days straight. Richard Sterling gripped the microphone with theatrical flair, his voice dripping with disdain. "This woman thinks she can join our elite engineering team. No degree, no credentials, just delusion." He tossed a wrench at Eleanor's feet, the metal clanging against the polished floor. "You have 30 minutes to fix what my best engineers couldn't."
"Fail, and you leave forever!" The crowd erupted in mocking laughter.
Eleanor bent down and picked up the wrench with trembling hands, a flash of old pain crossing her brown eyes. "Mr. Sterling," she said quietly, "this seems less like an interview and more like public humiliation." "Call it what you want," Sterling sneered. "But if you can't handle the pressure, maybe you should stick to your library books." Sarah Thompson, the lead engineer, stepped forward with a cruel smile. "I reviewed your application, library work, fixing cars in backyard garages. This isn't where amateurs play with toys. This is where real engineers work with million-dollar technology. Eleanor tried once more. I understand your skepticism, but perhaps if we could discuss this privately. No, Sterling cut her off, his voice booming through the hall. Everyone here deserves to see why Sterling Aerospace only hires the best, the credentialed, the proven, the worthy. A young engineer, barely 25, with a fresh MIT diploma, pointed at Eleanor's slightly trembling right hand. Look, she's
shaking already. Probably never seen a real aircraft engine up close. The laughter crescendoed. Camera phones rose to capture the spectacle.
Eleanor's reasonable attempts at discussion were drowned in a sea of institutional arrogance, leaving her isolated and exposed before the hungry crowd. The R7000 has a fatal flaw, Richard Sterling continued, gesturing dramatically at the massive engine. My best engineers, all Ivy League graduates, spent 3 days searching for it. Miss Mitchell has 30 minutes. He paused for effect, letting the impossibility of the task sink in. When she fails, and she will fail, perhaps it will teach others like her to know their place. The pressure in the room was suffocating. James Morrison, head of engineering, stepped forward with his MIT class ring catching the light. Richard, this is a waste of time. Obviously she's just another dreamer who watched too many YouTube videos. Sarah Thompson added her voice to the mockery, her words dripping with the kind of institutional arrogance that crushed dreams. We don't have all day for your little performance. Are you giving up already? Eleanor felt the weight of their collective contempt pressing down on her. Each cruel comment chipped away at her composure, reminding her of another time, another betrayal that had cost her everything. The young MIT graduate moved closer, emboldened by her silence. Maybe she's praying, he taunted. Hey lady, this is engineering, not church. Prayers won't fix metal. From the back of the room, Mark Davidson, the hiring manager who had initially been skeptical but fair, watched with growing discomfort. He leaned over to a colleague. This doesn't feel right. She aced every technical assessment we gave her. Then why is she just standing there? His colleague whispered back. Maybe because they're not giving her a chance to actually work, Davidson replied, his voice troubled. The cameras continued rolling. Journalists scribbled notes already composing. Headlines about the delusional woman who dared challenge Detroit's engineering elite. Eleanor stood isolated in the center of it all, feeling the familiar sting of being dismissed, underestimated, and written off before she could even begin. But as her fingers touched the metal surface of the engine, memory crashed over her like a wave, late nights in another lab, the joy of creation, the passion that had once driven her to revolutionize space travel, and the devastating betrayal that had brought it all crashing down. 20 minutes left, and Eleanor realized she faced a choice that would define not just this moment, but who she would choose to be going forward. 20 minutes, Richard Sterling announced gleefully. I don't suppose you need instructions on which end is up? More laughter rippled through the crowd. More phones recorded her apparent failure. But as Eleanor examined the engine more closely, what she saw made her blood run cold. This wasn't just similar to her original design. It was her design, modified and corrupted by someone who didn't understand the underlying principles. The resonance frequency was wrong. The compression ratio was miscalibrated. At high altitude, this engine would experience catastrophic failure. Whoever had sold this design, whether Daniel directly or through corporate channels, had created a flying death trap. 10 minutes.
Left, Sterling's voice boomed. It appears Miss Mitchell is finally realizing the difference between fixing a Toyota and aerospace engineering.
Sarah Thompson moved closer with predatory satisfaction. We don't have all day. Time to admit what everyone already knows. You're out of your league. Eleanor's damaged right hand, scarred from an explosion that had ended her career 5 years ago, cramped painfully as she worked. The nerve damage made fine motor control difficult, each precise movement a small victory against physical limitation. But the breaking point wasn't the pain in her hand or the mockery of the crowd. It was the realization that if this engine flew with these flaws, people would die. Innocent passengers, crew members, families, all because she had chosen silence over truth. She thought of her father's words the night before she left for MIT. "Eleanor, you were born to soar. Don't let anyone clip your wings." She thought of her team at NASA, the brilliant minds who had trusted her vision and worked beside her. Those people deserved better than seeing their work perverted into this dangerous counterfeit. 5 minutes, Sterling announced with undisguised glee. Time to admit defeat. Eleanor set down her tools and stepped back from the engine. The hall fell silent, anticipating her admission of failure. She reached into her pocket, fingers finding the small NASA pin she always carried, its surface worn smooth from 5 years of secret handling. In that moment, standing before 200 people who saw her as nothing, Eleanor made her choice. She could walk away, return to her quiet life at the library, let the past remain buried. But if this engine flew and failed, if people died because she chose silence over truth, could she live with that? Her father had taught her that integrity wasn't about being recognized for doing right. It was about doing right, especially when no one would thank you for it. Eleanor turned back to face the assembled crowd, and something in her expression made the front row step back instinctively. When she spoke, her voice carried an authority that silenced even Richard Sterling. "I need a digital micrometer and precision pressure calibration kit, Mitutoyo and Fluke models specifically." The transformation in her demeanor was so sudden, so complete, that several people gasped audibly. "Unless," she continued with deadly calm, "you want this engine to explode at 40,000 feet. James Morrison stammered in shock. "What did you say? Explode?" But Eleanor had already turned back to the engine, her movements now swift and decisive, despite her damaged hand. With practiced efficiency that spoke of years of expertise, she disassembled the pressure regulation system in 30 seconds flat, something Sterling's entire MIT team hadn't managed in 3 days. "Look here," she pointed to a microscopic flaw, her voice carrying the authority of absolute certainty. "The resonance frequency is desynced from the compression ratio. At cruising altitude, the pressure differential will create harmonic vibration throughout the combustion chamber. Complete structural failure within minutes." Sarah Thompson pushed forward, her face draining of color. "That's impossible. How could you know the resonance frequency?" "Because this is a modified Orion design," Eleanor cut her off. Hands never pausing in their work. Someone copied it without understanding the fundamental principles. The compression ratio must be exactly 14.71, not 15.2 as configured here. Richard Sterling stood frozen. "Orion? The NASA Orion engine? How could you possibly—" But Eleanor was already deep in the repair, her voice reciting specifications with machine-like precision, fuel injection timing, 23.7 microseconds, turbine speed, 97,300 RPM, bypass ratio 5.1 to 1. Each number was exact, impossible to know without access to classified NASA documents, or being the original designer. The audience watched in stunned silence as Eleanor recalibrated the entire system with movements so fluid they seemed choreographed. The young MIT engineer who had mocked her earlier now stared with his mouth hanging open. These weren't the actions of a garage mechanic or library worker. This was mastery at the highest level. Mark Davidson, watching from the back, whispered to his colleague, I knew there was something special about her, but this is beyond anything I imagined. The tide was turning, and everyone in the room could feel it. "Done!" Eleanor announced, setting down her tools. She initiated the test sequence, and the engine roared to life with a sound so perfectly calibrated it was almost musical. Every parameter on the diagnostic screen glowed green. Optimal readings.
"Across the board, who are you?" James Morrison's voice cracked with disbelief. Eleanor wiped her hands on a cloth, then turned to face the assembled crowd.
The tremor in her damaged hand was gone, replaced by the steady confidence of someone who had nothing left to hide. "I'm the person who warned NASA about this exact failure mode 5 years ago when I designed the original Orion engine. The revelations
"Hit the room like a physical force!" "Impossible," Sarah Thompson protested, her voice rising to near hysteria. "The Orion engine was designed by Dr. Eleanor Mitchell, and she's dead, disappeared, disgraced." Eleanor's laugh held no humor, only
a deep, resonating sadness. "I'm standing right here. You just couldn't see me past your assumptions." She rolled up her sleeve, revealing the extensive scarring that covered her right arm, tissue damage extending from wrist to elbow. The explosion that had ended her NASA career was written in raised white lines across her skin. Dr. Mitchell, an elderly journalist in the third row, rose shakily to his feet, his voice trembling with recognition. "Eleanor Mitchell, the prodigy who was going to take us to Mars." Eleanor nodded once, a simple confirmation that shattered 200 worlds of assumption. The room erupted in chaos. Cameras flashed like strobing lights, phones rang with urgent calls to editors. Richard Sterling gripped the podium as if it were the only solid thing left in his universe. "This can't be real," he muttered, his face ash-white. "The record said you were—" "Daniel Walsh reported that you had—" "Daniel Walsh," Eleanor repeated the name, like pronouncing a curse. "The man who sold my design to Lockheed Martin for $50 million. And apparently Lockheed sold it to you, Mr. Sterling." She moved to the computer terminal, typing a few quick commands. The screen filled with the original Orion blueprints, complete with her embedded signatures in the code, comments marked EM NASA 2019 peppered throughout the documentation. "This," she gestured to the screen, "is proof that your R7000 is—"
an illegal copy of my work. Sterling's empire of arrogance was crumbling in real time, brick by brick, assumption by assumption. Eleanor held up her phone, displaying legal documents.
"And this is a cease and desist from my attorneys. Sterling Aerospace is facing a $500 million patent infringement lawsuit." Richard Sterling collapsed into his chair as if his legs had been cut from beneath him. The man who had orchestrated her public humiliation now sat broken, his carefully constructed world of superiority reduced to rubble. But Eleanor's next words shocked the room even more. "However, I'm not filing it." The stunned silence that followed was absolute. "I didn't come here for revenge or money. I came because I recognized my own design being corrupted into something that could kill innocent people. That's all." She looked directly into the nearest camera, knowing her words would ripple far beyond this room. 5 years ago, I let love and trust blind me to betrayal. I lost everything to one man's greed. But today, I choose not to let the past define my future. Today, I choose to fix what's broken and walk away. Eleanor moved to stand before Richard Sterling, who seemed to have aged a decade in minutes. "The engine is repaired. My consulting fee will be $1, the price
of a cup of coffee."
Because engineering excellence shouldn't be measured by ego or gender, but by its ability to save lives. She turned to address the entire room one final time. You want to know who I really am? I'm someone who believes talent doesn't live in diplomas hanging on walls or in the circumstances of birth. It lives in passion, dedication, and the courage to keep going when the world tells you you're not enough. Sarah Thompson was the first to break the spell, her voice thick with unshed tears. Wait, please. I'm so sorry. What we did was unforgivable. Eleanor paused, turning back to look at the young woman who had been among her cruelest tormentors. Sorry doesn't change what happened, Sarah, but it might change what happens next. James Morrison stepped forward, his MIT class ring suddenly feeling like a shackle. Dr. Mitchell, please stay. Sterling Aerospace needs someone like you. We could offer you any position, any salary. What you need, Eleanor interrupted gently, is to change your culture, not hire me to absolve your guilt. Look around this room. How many women are on your engineering team? How many people have you rejected because they didn't graduate from the right schools or look the right way? The confrontation was complete. Justice had been served not through destruction, but through dignity, the most devastating victory of all. The conference hall remained frozen in absolute silence as Eleanor Mitchell gathered her simple canvas bag and prepared to leave. 200 people, the same engineers who had laughed at her, the executives who had schemed to humiliate her, the journalists who had come to document her failure, stood like statues carved from shame and revelation. Richard Sterling, finally, found his voice, though it emerged as barely more than a whisper. I'll make this right. Whatever it takes, I'll restore your reputation, ensure everyone knows the truth. Eleanor paused at the edge of the stage. Mr. Sterling, you can do something else. You can open doors for the next Eleanor, the one who's sitting in a garage, right? Now, dreaming of building something extraordinary but being told she's not enough. A young reporter raised her hand tentatively. Dr. Mitchell, where will you go now? Surely NASA would want... I'm going back to the library, Eleanor said simply, where I help children from poor neighborhoods learn about science. Where an 8-year-old girl can dream about Mars without being told she's the wrong gender or the wrong class. She moved toward the exit, the crowd parting like a biblical sea, creating a path for the woman they had tried to destroy. At the door, Eleanor turned one final time, her silhouette framed by the afternoon light streaming through the glass. Someone once called me decorative window dressing, pretty but useless. But every flower has thorns, and sometimes those thorns are necessary to protect the beauty within. She left then, walking out into the Detroit afternoon, leaving behind a room full of people struggling to reconcile their assumptions with reality. Sarah Thompson sank into a chair, tears flowing freely as she stared at her hands, the same hands that had pointed and mocked at a legend she hadn't recognized. James Morrison quietly removed his MIT diploma from the wall, looking at it as if seeing for the first time how little it truly meant without humanity behind it. Richard Sterling stood alone on the stage beside the $2 million engine, saved by a woman he had deemed unworthy. His empire of arrogance lay in ruins around him. Outside, Eleanor Mitchell disappeared into the Detroit crowd, just as she had vanished from Houston 5 years ago. But this time, she wasn't running from anything. She had found herself again in the most unlikely place, not in accolades or recognition, but in the simple act of doing what was right, despite those who would drag her down. Monday would find her, back at the library, helping young minds discover the wonders of science, planting seeds of dreams in hearts that society might otherwise overlook. And somewhere among those children might be the next revolutionary, the next dreamer who would change the world, if only someone believed in them. Some battles are won not with power, but with dignity intact. Eleanor had chosen not to destroy, those who had tried to humiliate her, not to wield her knowledge as a weapon of revenge. Instead, she had demonstrated something far more powerful, the strength to rise above, to fix what was broken, and to walk away with grace. In a world that often mistakes cruelty for strength and credentials for capability, she had shown that true power lies in knowing who you are, regardless of who others think you should be. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below, since we love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.